Dear first grade students at the Faculty of Commerce at Banha University in both Banha campus and Abur campus, welcome to the recorded lecture series for the module entitled Economics of Natural Resources and Environment. Recorded lectures are used in conjunction with face-to-face interactive lectures in the hybrid educational system at our university. The lecture is divided to two equal halves. One half is delivered on campus, whereas the other half is delivered via a recorded lecture. Recorded lectures are to be used in conjunction with your course textbooks. The current course is designed to be accessible to students who have not completed any introductory course in economics. The main source of the current lecture is chapter 17 of Perkin 2012. In the current lecture, we will analyze pollution as a negative externality. To do so, we first have to differentiate between marginal private cost and marginal social cost. This would be followed by briefly discussing main government methods to cope with external costs. We have discussed earlier during the current course that the environment has three main functions. These functions are provider of resources, provider of amenities, and absorber of waste. The environment acts like a sink for air pollutants, solid waste, and water pollutants. Pollutants are the residuals of production and consumption. These residuals must eventually be recycled or returned to the environment in one form or another. Their presence in the environment may depreciate the service flows received. Moreover, human activity can cause resource degradation. By human activity, we mean production and consumption of goods and services. Resource degradation occurs if a natural resource becomes less productive over time. For instance, if a river, which is used for fishing, is negatively affected by water pollution, then this river will become less productive over time. In other words, fish may not grow, they may produce less, and some fish may die. Furthermore, resource degradation can also be caused by other types of pollution or very intensive use of land, for example, for farming. In the current recorded lecture, we are going to analyze pollution as a negative externality. In order to analyze the economics of the external costs that arise from pollution, we need to distinguish between the private cost and the social cost of production. A private cost is a cost that is incurred by the producer of a good or a service. I know that you have been introduced to the concept of marginal change in the course of Principles of Economics. So let's define the marginal cost. It is the cost of producing an additional unit of a good or service. Thus, marginal private cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of good or service that is incurred by its producer. If the cost of producing a good or a service is not incurred by the producer but incurred by other people, it is called an external cost. Thus, a marginal external cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of a good or service that falls in people other than the producer. Accordingly, the marginal social cost is the marginal cost incurred by the producer and by everyone else on whom the cost falls. It is the sum of marginal private cost and marginal external cost. Note that costs are expressed in monetary terms such as dollars, but we must always remember that a cost is an opportunity cost. It is something real such as clean air or clean river is given up to get something. Now, a relevant question might be how to determine a monetary value for external costs such as pollution. Well, economists use market prices to determine a monetary value in the cost of pollution. To make this point clear, let's consider an example. Suppose that there are two similar rivers. One is polluted, whereas the other is clean. There are 500 identical homes which are built along the side of each river. The monthly rent of homes on the clean river is $2,500. For those houses on the polluted river, the monthly rent is $1,500. If the only deductible difference between the two rivers and the two locations is the pollution, then the monthly cost of pollution is the rent decreases of $1,000. Therefore, the total external cost of pollution for the 500 homes located on the polluted river is $500,000 per month. In the next slides, we will use a graph to illustrate the relationship between output and the costs in a chemical industry that pollutes the environment. Figure 17.1 illustrates an example of the relationship between output and cost in a chemical industry that pollutes the environment. MC is the marginal private cost curve. It increases as the quantity of chemical produced increases. Thus, it has a positive slope. If the firms dump waste into a river, they impose an external cost on other users of the river. Here, we will assume that the marginal external cost increases with the amount of the chemical produced. MSC is the marginal social cost curve. The vertical distance between the MSC curve and the MSC curve is the marginal external cost. It is worth mentioning that the marginal social cost curve is above marginal private cost for all quantities. The attached figure shows the relationship between the quantity of chemical produced and the cost of the pollution it creates. However, it doesn't tell us how much pollution the chemical industry creates. In other words, the figure doesn't inform us about the quantity produced of pollution. The quantity produced of pollution depends upon the quantity of the chemical produced, which is in turn is dependent upon supply and demand in the market for the chemicals. We will briefly discuss this point in the next slides. Assume that there is an unregulated industry. This means that this industry is free to pollute. In such a case, the amount of pollution created by this industry depends on the market equilibrium price and the quantity of the good produced. For more discussion, let's consider figure 17.2 in the next slide. In figure 17.2, the line labeled D represented the demand curve for a pollution creating chemical. This demand curve also measures the marginal social benefit from the chemical. Note that the marginal social benefit is abbreviated as MSB. The line labeled S represented the supply curve of the chemical. This curve also measures the producer's marginal private cost, that is MC. The supply curve is the marginal private cost curve because when firms make their production and supply decisions, they consider only the costs they will incur. Market equilibrium occurs when the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. In this figure, the equilibrium price is $100 and the equilibrium quantity is 4,000 tons of chemical per month. However, this equilibrium is not efficient given that the allocation of resources is efficient when marginal social benefit equals marginal social cost. Thus, the efficient outcome occurs when the quantity of chemical produced is 2,000 tons a month. Therefore, the unregulated market overproduces by 2,000 tons of chemical a month and creates a deadweight loss shown by the gray triangle. Main methods that governments can use to cope with external costs include taxes and emission charges. Let's consider them in the next slides. The government can set a tax equal to the marginal external cost, so that marginal private cost plus the tax equal marginal social cost. These sorts of taxes are called Bigivian taxes in honor of the British economist Arthur Ego, who first proposed this approach to externalities. Let's assume that the government has accurately imposed a tax that is equal to the external cost on the factories. Figure 17.4 illustrates the effects of this tax. This tax is added to the marginal private cost to find the market supply curve. The market supply curve is the one labeled S equals MC plus tax. In such a case, the supply curve tells us the quantity supplied at each price given the firm's marginal cost and the tax they must pay. In this figure, the appropriate tax equals the length of the double-headed arrow. The supply curve is also the marginal social cost curve because the pollution tax has been set equal to the marginal external cost. Market equilibrium occurs at price of $150 a ton and a quantity of 2,000 tons of chemical per month. This equilibrium is efficient because marginal social cost equals marginal social benefit. The firms incur a marginal private cost of $88 per ton and pay a tax of $62 per ton. Hence, the government collects tax revenue that is obtained by multiplying the quantity produced by pollution tax. The purple rectangle shows the government's tax revenue. The government can use emission charges, which are a price per unit of pollution. If the charges are set equal to the marginal external cost, the efficient outcome will be achieved. However, the government needs a lot of information that is not available to determine the correct amount of a charge. Emission charges have been used only modestly in the United States of America, but they are very common in Europe where, for example, France, Germany, and the Netherlands make water polluters pay a waste disposal charge. The next slide displays key concepts and terms which have been introduced during the current lecture. Kindly spend enough time in studying these concepts and terms. This is the end of today's recorded lecture. Thank you.